Hey everybody, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? It's time for a wonderful experience to talk with a DNA expert, Mary Eberle. Hey Mary, in our Facebook Live today. So this is Facebook and YouTube Live. So I want to welcome everybody. If you are just finding me here on Are You My Cousin? I try to help you find your ancestors. I want you to help grow your family tree, but I also really don't want you to be overwhelmed in the process. And so if that's sort of what you're looking for, then you know that you are in the right place. So I do want to welcome everybody. If you're coming in just viewing, if you don't mind, let me know where you're watching from. That lets me see, know that you can hear and see everything fine on your end of things so that we can make sure everybody's getting the information that they want. So that would be great for me. While you're doing that, couple things that are just going on. I'll give you a couple heads up that things that are happening as we are going. If you would, I would love it if you're watching on YouTube or if you're ever interested in the YouTube channel, if you'd hit subscribe. That lets you know when I post new videos, which I do once a week. YouTube will let you know when they are becoming available, and you can catch them then as well. Oh, we've got lots of people showing up, and thank you so much. Hey, Robert from California, somebody from it's flipping so fast, it's hard to catch up. St. Albans, Vermont. Hey, Catherine from Tennessee, Rosemary from Tampa. Oh, I recognize a lot of names. Okay, guys, it's coming in so fast, I can't keep up with everybody. Oh, North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, Florida, Washington. Hey, Lorraine from British Columbia and Canada. Yay, Diane out of Texas. The Dallas area. Yes, I love Dallas. I think that's such a neat area. We've got Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Catherine out of Ohio. And Annette is here from across the Atlantic. She says in England. So welcome. We are definitely international with our Canadians and English and UK folks here. Hey, Bridget from the from Indiana, not far from the Allen County Public Library coming up. So we've got people from all over, literally Texas, Colorado, and Louisiana. So welcome, guys. I'm so excited that you guys could join us today. So quick thing that I'm going to pop a link in there, just so you don't know, just so you'll know. We are obviously talking about DNA. I'll give you more of an introduction of Mary here in just a minute, but I did want to let you know that MyHeritage is currently running their premium DNA kit sale. So they are on sale. I think it's like $44, and then if you order 2 or more, you get free shipping. And so I'm going to pop a link to that into the chat since we are talking DNA. And full disclosure, I am an affiliate for them, but if you are looking to stock up on DNA, this is probably a good time to do that with them. So wanted to let you guys know that. All right, now we're going to get right to it, guys. And thank you so much. People are still coming in. Wonderful, wonderful. So glad to see everybody coming in more from Canada and Ontario. So yay, really excited that you're here. All right, so you can tell here on the screen, I have Mary Eberle. Mary is the owner of DNA Hunters, and she is my DNA expert. She's who I go to, guys. I am not a DNA expert by any means. I know enough to kind of get myself going, but when I need to really dig in and ask questions, Mary's my go-to person for that. So many of you may have seen Mary with me before here on the channel. We try to come live once a month to answer DNA questions, and Mary will, she talks about various topics. So Mary, welcome. I'm so excited that you are here today. And once you get started, I'll go ahead and I'll pop your link. I'll pop a link to your website down in the chat as well, guys, so that you'll be able to find her afterwards. And I'm going to let you take it over, Mary. I know you've got some really great topic for us today, and I'll let you introduce that topic.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks everyone for being here. Today I'm going to talk about building trees for your DNA matches. And why would you do that? It's because a lot of times people don't have trees. And sometimes we're not even sure who the matches are. So for example, the person might just have their initials, or they might be using an alias. And with a little bit of detective work, that's for me, it's very exciting to do that detective work. You can figure out who your matches are, and then more importantly, you can build trees for them. And I wanted to share with you some examples of this. And Lisa, I know we talked a little bit about, what happens when you've got this match, and and people also, people they'll reach out to a match, right? And what happens? Like
They don't hear anything.
I don't hear anything. And so it's funny. I usually take the approach of trying to figure out who they are and building a tree for them before I reach out, just because it's quicker. Like I instead of like waiting overnight to see if they respond and then they don't respond, I just jump in and try to build their trees.
That's actually, I hadn't thought about that, but that makes complete sense. And I know that people either not having a tree online or people reaching out to others and not getting response, that is a huge pain point for a lot of researchers when they're really trying to break those brick walls. So I love the idea that you really just kind of go ahead and do it.
Right. And in doing so, a lot of times you can figure out the likely way they're connected to you. So when you get to the point of reaching out, you've got a lot more to say, as opposed to just saying, "Hi, I'm your DNA match. Do you know how we're related?" You can say, "Oh, maybe we're related through these families," because
that's an excellent point, because I know I periodically will get a match reaching to me and saying, we're related. How are we related? And I'm honest, guys, I don't have time. I don't have time to do that. And I don't. But then on the flip side, I had in the last year, somebody reached out to me and she said, I've looked at your tree and this is the only surname I recognize. Do you think we could possibly match? And it turned out to be absolutely yes. It was a solid match and we were able to connect everything up. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it helps to convey our sincereness that we're trying to figure something out, as opposed to, some kind of random person going, "Oh, I think we're a match," and questioning, I think that can kind of give you a little bit more sense of security when somebody's reaching out to you.
Right. And you've taken the initiative and done some work. So I have a few PowerPoint slides that I would like to share.
Excellent.
So let's
People
see.
are still coming in and finding us. Welcome, guys.
Great.
We're so excited. Mary's getting ready to, while she's pulling that up, I see we have Albuquerque and California and New Hampshire in the house again as well. So really excited that you guys are all here. If you have questions as Mary goes by, you are welcome to put them in the comment section. I will be monitoring those as we go, guys, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we possibly can. So just wanted to let you know that option is there. Okay, Mary, you ready for me to add this?
I am ready.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. And this will be examples. I'll share with you at the end that I do have a full handout for this talk, and I'll share how you can receive that. So let's start out with an example from Ancestry. And this person, Mr. Bees, he actually had his full name, but he did not have a tree. And he's a pretty strong match. He looks like he's second to third cousin. And when I looked at his shared matches, I could tell that he's related to me through the Psalms. So Psalm, S-A-L-M, just like the Bible with the P-S-A-L-M. That's my mom's maiden name. So I knew that he was likely to be a second to third cousin through the Psalm family. And that told me that I should build out his tree to his great-grandparents, since second cousins share great-grandparents, or maybe to the second great-grandparents, in case he's a third cousin. One of the tools that I really like for doing this detective work and tree building is Ben Verified. And it's a paid service. They charge twice a year. It's about $60 every time, so about $120 per year. There are some free services too that you can do. I think Ben Verified, somebody pointed out to me recently, has a trial where you can just test it out. But there are other services too, like this. But I go to Ben Verified and I put in his name, and it came up with a couple of different ones with that first name and the second name. They were about 30 years different in age. And I looked at the known cities. And I know where the Psalms come from. In general, I would say the 87-year-old person looks more likely to be the right guy. He's from New Holstein, Wisconsin. And but I can't rule out the other 57-year-old because Kaukauna, Wisconsin is near New Holstein, and I could easily figure out how one of my Psalm cousins would end up in Kaukauna. So I think there were more people with this name, but these two seemed the most likely. So then the question is, well, how do I figure out, is it number one or number two? And for this question, I ran a Google search just with his name plus that Psalm surname. And that gave me a couple of hits to different obituaries where a Psalm had married a Beast. And I've highlighted those with the red arrows. We've got a couple different people. And the one on the bottom had his name. So his name meaning, instead of Mr., his first name. So from this, I built a tree for him. And I built it back to some ancestors that I recognized. And these are his great-grandparents. And they're my second great-grandparents. So he is my second cousin once removed. And it's consistent with what the DNA was telling me, that he's likely my second to third cousin. And it's consistent with what I thought I should do in terms of building his tree, that I needed to build it to the great-grandparents or to his second great-grandparents. So that was a really nice, pretty straightforward example from Ancestry, where now I know he's a Psalm cousin. I can label him as such with those colored dots in Ancestry. And I have built this tree, which ultimately it's connected to mine, since Nicholas Psalm and Maria Wagner are my second great-grandparents. And when I'm doing this tree building, I'm doing it inside of Ancestry. And I do it inside my Eberle family tree. And I'm hoping that I can connect these people up to my known ancestors. So that is my Ancestry example, and also a good example of how Google served up who he likely was, and I was able to build his tree. This is a MyHeritage example, and her name was Patricia, and then a Polish surname that I didn't recognize. She did have a tree. So it says she appears in a family tree on MyHeritage with 37 people, and that she's the manager of it. She's a relatively distant cousin, maybe a third or fourth cousin, only sharing 35.8 centimorgans. But this looked interesting, and I wanted to know who she was. So I pulled up her tree on MyHeritage, and that told me that that Polish surname was her married name. And because I could see who her father and mother were, because they were deceased, then I knew her maiden name. And from that, I recognized her. and she was somebody that I matched on Ancestry. And I had actually built a tree for her over on Ancestry. She's this red arrow person. And these people, all the people with the DNA pictures, are my DNA matches, and I'm connecting them back to these ancestors. And interestingly, this is not part of my known family tree, but I believe that this is part of my mystery, where I'm looking for my second great grandfather. And what this really helped me with was that once I recognized who she was, and I had built a tree for her, I knew that she would be important on MyHeritage because any of her shared matches there could also help me with this mystery. So it was a way of identifying someone over at MyHeritage who can help, just through the shared matches. And it also helped because MyHeritage gives you that segment data, and I'm doing some tracking of that segment data for this mystery. So that's my MyHeritage example. Here's an example from 23andMe. This is from an unknown father case. So I had a client and her mother who was living. So actually the mom was the client, but her mother was in her 80s, and I worked with the daughter to figure out this mystery. And she had an unknown father. She had a birth certificate from Minnesota, but they could never figure out who the father was. They had a name, but the name just didn't ever connect with anyone. So I checked her matches over on 23andMe, and this match, whose initials were SD, came up as a likely second to third cousin. And 23andMe shows you where you're matching the DNA with your match. But I was trying to figure out, well, who is this person? Because 23andMe, most people on 23andMe do not have family trees. That's very, like I would say 99% of the time there aren't any family trees. So I looked at our shared matches. On 23andMe, they're called relatives in common. I apologize, that relatives word got cut off. But relatives in common. And I saw that her two sons had done DNA testing. So this is SD versus the client, and then the two sons. And it's telling me that for the client, these sons look like second cousins twice removed, and that, of course, they were SD's son, or sons. And they had their full names, so I knew I could pretty easily figure out what I could about these people. And one of the sons, the one MD son, he had run for political office. And on Facebook, he had a page for his campaign. And I reached out to him on Facebook and just said, hey, I'm helping this woman in her 80s look for her birth father. And it looks like you and your mom and your brother are DNA matches to her. And I'm just trying to figure out how you're connected. And he told me that they had done DNA testing because his mom had an unknown father. So, at that point, you always think, oh my gosh, I hope my client's related to her through her mother's side. Mm-hmm. And the mother, SD, her maiden name was Scottish. So I had her married name, which is why the D is the same between her and her sons. And just that background about the unknown father, I was able to find her marriage record. So I got to her maiden name through that. And here's the tree I built for her. So we've got her, her mom, and then her mother's mother is a Schaefer, and then her mother's mother is this person, who was a Macaulay. Mm. And that was really helpful because her Macaulays were from Nova Scotia. And over on Ancestry, I had a group of matches who were also Macaulays from Nova Scotia. And the downside to this was that I couldn't figure out how these two sets of Macaulays were related. Mm-hmm. But the upside was that I could use this SD to fish out other Macaulays over on 23andMe.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, so that was really helpful. And in the end, I did find the birth father. It was a man who had moved at a very young age from Canada into Minnesota, and the pregnancy was with like 15 or 16-year-olds, and it was totally consistent with the story, which was that her mother's mother ran this young man out of town, and the name was really close to the name on the birth certificate, mm-hmm. but there were spelling differences. So that's why the client couldn't ever track down the man on the birth certificate, is because the grandma who probably helped fill out this birth certificate didn't quite have the name right, didn't have the spelling right.
Got it.
So, those examples are instances where I could figure out who the match was, who I could build out a tree for them. Mm-hmm. And I do have a full version of this talk over at Legacy Family Tree Webinars. And it's called the same thing. It's called Building Family Trees for Your DNA Matches. And I wanted to share that with your audience in case they are members over at Legacy, because it's in the library and you can search for it either with the title or with my surname. And there's also a handout that goes along with this talk that I prepared for Legacy, but you can get it at dnahunters.com/building trees. So that will get you on my mailing list also. I don't email that often, usually once a month or so.
Unlike me.
I should email more often. But people worry, like, I don't want to, that they don't want to be on too many lists, but this is a pretty minor list. But I always let people know when I'm going to be live with you, Lisa, and sometimes I'm speaking for genealogy groups across the country, but when they're on Zoom, a lot of times they're free to anybody across the country and even in other countries. So I wanted to share that with everyone.
Yeah, and I just put the links to Mary's handout and to the Legacy Family Tree Webinars website into the chat. Legacy Family Tree Webinars, as Mary said, is a subscription-based thing, but they have, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of webinars over there to view. So those are in there for you guys if you're interested. I'd be happy to do that. That was really helpful with reaching out. I like seeing those examples that you gave and how you were able to use so you were mostly you matched that woman the 23andMe, and then you were able to find her matches over in Ancestry, but you were able to use matches going back and forth and be able to narrow things down. I thought that was really an interesting, it's just a piece of it I hadn't really thought about it when it came to building out trees. I mean, I do build out other people's trees, but probably not quite to the extent that I could when it comes to looking for other matches. That I think that was a really good point there that you made.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thanks. Right. And just, I would say 95% of my work on Ancestry, but then if people have tested elsewhere, you can find some really important matches at these other sites. But then the tree that I build for them is back in Ancestry, but I'm using them kind of like a fishing hook, right? Like I want to pull out other people because they might offer more information. They might have a tree, they might have surnames. You can just see how those pieces fit together at that other site.
And I had not realized that 23andMe did not have, or had so many that didn't have a tree attached to it. I did not realize that piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting when you said that.
They do have a place for surnames. So people sometimes will upload their surnames, and sometimes it is 4 or 2, or it just sometimes it's a larger list, but and that those can be clues, and you can also search. So like in this instance where I knew Macaulay was an important surname, I could go into 23andMe into their search window and add that and search for that surname. And if somebody had it as their surname or one of their the surnames in their list, then it would pull up those people.
That makes sense. Maggie in the comments on the YouTube comments says she doesn't have a tree at 23andMe, but she added her link to the public tree at WikiTree.
That's good.
So I think that's probably, I wouldn't be surprised, because it is hard to keep a tree at all these places, but you want people to have access to it. But we're constantly working on our trees too. I don't know if I can keep them all updated at this point.
Right.
So she also, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as she said, they let you link to a tree elsewhere. So you could link to your Ancestry tree, or a wiki tree or whatever. And but it's just that hardly anybody does.
Yeah. Allison had a question. She said, how would you put a tree together for an unknown father, but where the mom was adopted and you have no info? Would love to decipher the lines. So unknown father and her mother was adopted.
So does that mean the mother has unknown parents?
That's what I'm thinking. Allison, if you can enlighten us, but it sounds like that was how I would interpret that the mother also has unknown parents.
Well, what I do is I look for the top match, and then I look for their shared matches, and I create that genetic network of those shared matches. And I look through their trees, and I try to figure out how is this group related to each other. So if it's typical, ideally you find a common surname or a common ancestral couple to that group. And depending upon how close of a match it is, so let's say it looks like a second cousin. Well, if you can find, if there's second cousins in that group, and you can find the common great-grandparent, well, now you've got the common great-grandparents of the adoptee. And you don't know if it's the maternal or the paternal, but you're starting to fill out their tree based on the matches trees.
Okay.
So that's how I would start and continue from there.
That makes sense. Thank you. Catherine said she heard from Daniel over at MyHeritage that the legacy family tree has 1,800 webinars up there. So that is a lot. Yeah, Allison did come back and say it was unknown. Her mother had unknown for both. So yeah, that would be that's a tough one. That'll take a while. So yeah. All right. I don't know if any other questions. I'm going to run back through the list to see. Yes, I'm so excited everybody was here today. We have so many folks from everywhere. Diane said, if someone's looking for a possible sister, who should test? The person looking had tested, but should a son test also?
I would say, so if you're looking for a sister, then it's just important to be at all of the DNA testing companies in case that person tests there, right? So if you're only at Ancestry and your sister or her child or her grandchild tests at MyHeritage, well, you're never going to be connected. But so it's more important to be at multiple companies, and it's not helpful to test a child, meaning the son, because he only has half of your DNA. So it's just going to be like a diluted version of you.
Yeah, that makes sense. The important part being the whole testing as many places as you can, definitely. Catherine said, wants to know if I can save the chat. I think I can, guys. But the video will definitely be up on YouTube. The chat will definitely be, Facebook chat saves automatically, and YouTube chat is supposed to, but sometimes it doesn't. So I'll keep a check on it. I'll see what I can do, and I'll make sure I post all the links. I'll go back in and edit the chat over on YouTube if I need to make sure everybody has all the links that they need and can do that kind of thing. I will go in, and guys, if you are late, if you were later joining us, just to let you know that MyHeritage through the 17th, so that's coming up fast, is having their July cyber sale for DNA kits. So they are at $44, and if you order 2 or more, you get free shipping. And so this is a great time to actually stock up if you need to test over at MyHeritage. Let you know there. And just full disclosure, I am an affiliate for them as well.
I was just going to add also that I've had really good luck reaching out to people on Facebook, which is funny to me that, it's just, it's not connected to DNA at all, right? And here I reached out to this person's son, and I tell people what I'm doing, and I have a good reason for reaching out. I'm trying to help this 80-some-year-old woman figure out who her birth father is, and and this person was super helpful and replied right away. And I've done it for some of my DNA matches too, and people in general, it almost works better than doing it at Ancestry, where where people might not be logging on. Not to say that it's going to work 100% of the time, but it's just always like, it's nice to think like, oh, people are willing to help, and people are genuinely interested.
Well, and I think you have a really good point too, that sometimes we get so, we're doing genealogy and we're so into the sites that we're not necessarily getting off the sites and using things such as Google, been verified, or like you said, even Facebook, to be able to use those. I think sometimes we're just so into the, we're in that database already. And so that's where we kind of stay. I think sometimes we forget to look outside, that there are a lot of other tools to use. Catherine had a question about Diane's question. She said, for Diane's question about the sister, should a brother be tested if there is one to get a possible additional matches? So Diane was looking for the sister.
I mean, if you're looking for a sister, and she the sister also tested, you're going to match 100% of the time, if you're at the same company. And then if her child test, and I assume it depends if it's a full or if it's a half sister, but up into a second cousin, if the two of you are at the same DNA testing company, they'll match you.
Yeah.
So a second cousin is about 200 and some centimorgans. And if it's a half sister, that's more like 1750. If it's her child, then that's half that amount. So that is 900 or so. And then if it's her grandchild, then it would be, and I'm just doing this math to get back to that second cousin. But So if it's her grandchild and she's a half sister, it would be 450 centimorgans on average, and you should match her, right? So the idea of a brother testing to help to get more matches, that's going to start to come into play if you're looking for like third cousins or fourth cousins, or maybe even a second cousin once removed. But otherwise, for those closer matches, like in this specific instance where you're looking for a sister or a half sister, then it's not going to help unless he's at one company and you're at the other. Like you're covering those companies through multiple people.
So the important thing is that she tests at all the companies, or has her DNA at all the companies, that it's not so much more family members, but because it's such a close relationship that she just makes sure she covers her bases for that. So.
Right. And there are registries set up for adoptees to be paired with family, and I would just Google that for the state, and also just to contact the state, because there are different laws in every state about who gets access to information. And I'm trying to remember, Virginia was one where an adoptee's sibling could get the original birth certificate, or it was weird, because normally the sibling doesn't have any rights. It's usually the adoptee can get their original birth certificate, or the adoptee's child, or the adoptee's grandchild. But in this case, it was the adoptee's sibling. So,
yeah, you do have to check. I mean, it's just like so many of the record states vary from, it varies from state to state what you're allowed to have access to. Definitely. Vicki had a question about the been verified. When and why would you use been verified? If you want to touch back on that.
Sure. So if I have a name, whether they like that Mr. Beasy in my example, or sometimes I have, well, let's just say I end up with a name. Maybe they had an alias or initials, and I figure out who they are. Then I've got their contact information, but I also have, in the been verified report, I have their relatives. And, if I'm lucky, they have siblings. And if I'm really lucky, it has their parents. Right? So I use been verified to get those initial groupings of family members. And it doesn't say like this is their sister, this is their sister-in-law, this is their aunt, but it gives me information that I can use like in a Google search to look for an obituary where, like let's just take me as an example. If my been verified report were looked at, they would say, okay, Mary Eberle looks like she's got a sister, Elizabeth, and it looks like she has a brother, James. So now when a Google search is done, we can look for those three names put together, and probably, my mom's obituary pops up. It's that initial detective work to figure out who is this person and who are their relatives, and how can I start that process of building a tree for them.
I think it's a great tool. I haven't used it yet, but yeah, I know a lot of people have. And I think you can do it's not a free trial, but it's a less expensive trial. I think that they have an option for it. So might be something worth checking out for folks to do that. Okie doke. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure and grab Mary's handout.
Thanks, everybody. I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you are welcome. You are welcome. We got one more question in the chat. It says, from Jemmy, says, any hints for searching for paternal great-grandfather? Tested multiple companies, including Y, tested 3 H1C and one sorry, it's flipping. The comments are scrolling. I can't get them. And one cousin first removed. So he's been looking for a long time.
Okay. are you at all of the DNA testing companies? It sounds like you're probably at Family Tree DNA if you did Y DNA testing.
It's like multiple, it said multiple test companies, so.
Okay, multiple companies. Yeah. Sometimes it's a matter of contacting older relatives to see if they knew something about this mystery person, what is known, and or maybe, yeah, I don't know, great grandfather. It should be doable, I think, especially if it's European heritage. Somebody of European heritage. So yeah, I would just be all of the places, and also thinking about if this is my great grandfather, then it is a second cousin match who would share that great grandfather, or maybe it's a half second cousin because it was an out of wedlock union that created your line. So then you'd be looking for a half second cousin. But yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's also a matter of like being patient and just waiting for the good matches to show up. But
yeah, Jim says he's the older relative now, so hang in there, Jim, as far as hopefully it'll, you'll get a match sooner or later. One last question, guys, we have from Sarah. She said, what's good wording for a Google search and locating an obit?
I think even like the example I gave where Mr. Beasy's obituaries, if his family obituaries came up, I just put in his name plus the other surname I knew. Without, that was it. I didn't say obituary, but you can add that. And Google's going to come up with those more recent obituaries, whereas other sources are better for the older ones. Right? Like newspapers.com has older ones, and there's genealogybank.com and, things like that too.
Yeah. And a lot of times, sometimes when I'm doing structuring a Google search, if I'm looking for an obituary, that I might put the person's name. If I know it, like I can put a date range. If I know there's a certain date range, or if I know like county, or if I know state, I'll add the location as much as I can. And if I can't get hits, I start dropping things off. Maybe I don't put the city down. Maybe I just leave the state, or maybe I take all the location off. So I do try to add a date as well as, or a date range and a location if I know it, because I can always drop that off if I need to.
Right. That's a good idea.
Yep. All right.
And I think Google knows, like, Mary's sitting in Madison, Wisconsin, so like they're tailoring my hits to be, whereas if it were somebody in another state, it might not be quite as productive.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. Jean said, okay, one last question this time, I promise, guys. Jean's brother took a Y DNA test with no result with the same last name, but just one result that had a different name, no answer for a contact. Any ideas?
Okay. So I had the same situation.
I did too.
No answer for the contact. So looking, well, it depends upon how close of a Y DNA match it is. If he also did an autosomal DNA test, I would see if you're matching there, because that's going to match if your second cousin are closer. And then also looking for that surname, like at other companies. So typically that would be at Ancestry, where you've got the most people who've tested, to see if that comes up. In my brother's case, it turned out that I think it's a very deep connection, like back to Germany, because when I looked at the surnames themselves, they came from the same area in Germany. So, that could be, I definitely wouldn't say like, oh my gosh, your dad's not your dad because your brother's Y DNA match didn't have the same surname, if it's just one.
Right. Okie doke. All right, guys. Oh, the questions keep coming in.
That's okay. It's okay.
All right. Last one, guys. And then we can also be following them on Facebook. We can also follow the comment or the questions later too as well. But Amy's got a question. In states where vital records weren't officially kept until the early 1900s or nearly 1900s, such as Ohio, where I'm bereft of records, I know the feeling. How can we find what newspapers were where in any given year so as to have clues as to who to start looking for DNA matches? Okay, let me read that again. How can you find what newspapers were, I think, available at any given year so as to have clues as to where to start looking for DNA matches? You know, I can probably, as far as finding newspapers, I actually would contact the archives there in Ohio, and I would let them know, you know, oftentimes they'll have a database for the newspapers. I mean, it may not be like, I'm not talking microfilmed or indexed, but they'll know what oftentimes newspapers were available. I've actually been able to work through state libraries, and they'll have large, you know, list of newspapers. A lot of times they're the smaller ones that I would never find otherwise that they might have because they're so local to the state area. So that might be one place I would start there. Chronicling America, you can also search for a lot of newspapers, even ones that are not digitized. You can actually do searches there for some of those really small newspapers. And I think I've got a blog post on that. If you go to my website, lisalisten.com, and put in Chronicling America in the search bar, that should pull that up for you guys. Yeah, Catherine, she's got it. Catherine Schultz also said Chronicling American Newspapers database, definitely, yeah. And sometimes you won't find them digitized, but if you know that they actually existed, then you can pursue trying to get hold of them.
And also, I find that having a newspapers.com pro subscription is really helpful because Ancestry will show you those obituaries as hints. Mm-hmm. And if you've got the subscription, I think at the pro level, then you can actually look at the newspaper article. And, you know, then that would give you an idea of what newspapers are relevant to your family.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Mary, for coming. Guys, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Even after we're done, we'll be able to see those and respond then as well. And thank you so much again, Mary. We'll be here next month as well. We'll have another DNA chat. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you, guys. Go out and have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are. And we'll see you next time. So bye, guys.
Bye.